Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for part 3 of this demo video. In this session, we will guide you through the process of lens calibration and virtual set alignment using the combination of REtracker, Bliss, and Fizz with Unreal Engine. Additionally, we will share some tricks to speed up the zoom lens calibration workflow. So let's get started. Launch the main REtracker Bliss application and turn on the REtracker Fizz. Then proceed to run the Unreal Editor. Please load the LiveLink preset we saved earlier. Verify whether the LiveLink Bliss and Fizz sources are successfully receiving tracking data. Since we are not currently utilizing April tag tracking, it is okay for the status not to be displayed in green. Therefore, we can leave it as it is for the time being. Open the lens file we previously created. To review, we have completed the 2-point lens mapping for focus, as well as a lens mapping for the iris. Regarding the focal length, as previously mentioned, it has been deleted, and we will utilize lens distortion as a method for calculating the focal length, distortion, and image center. Please take note that each time you rerun Unreal Editor, the raw Fizz lens data will require the renormalization process. As mentioned in part 2 of this demo video, each raw Fizz input will be scaled from 0 for the minimum to 1 for the maximum. Utilize the Nucleus M hand unit to turn the focus wheel, iris wheel, and zoom joystick to their respective minimum and maximum positions. In order to guarantee that both extreme points of each raw Fizz input are reached, kindly repeat this process several times. As we proceed, we will continue to enhance the focus lens mapping by adding more points. Let's start by adding a midpoint for the mapping curve. In my case, it is 180 centimeters, referring to the marker on my lens focus distance. Next, locate about 1/4 of the mapping curve and add another key point. I got 120 centimeters. Then proceed to the 3/4 of the mapping curve and add a key point there. In my case, it is 370 centimeters. Continue to introduce additional key points to refine the mapping curve further. This will ensure a more precise representation of your lens focus distance. Once all the necessary key points are in place, select them and set their tangents to automatic. As you can see, the mapping curve has now become smoother. For the iris lens mapping, let's maintain a straightforward 2-point linear curve. Kindly remember to save your progress for the lens file. Now let's prepare for the focal length and distortion calibration process. Zoom lenses possess diverse focal lengths, ranging from wide angle to telephoto. This prompts the need for checkerboards printed in various sizes to facilitate the focal length and distortion calibration process. For example, while an A3 size checkerboard might effectively serve its purpose when calibrating the minimum zoom position, however, when dealing with the maximum zoom position, the A3 size checkerboard might prove either too large or too close up. In such cases, opting for a smaller checkerboard when calibrating the maximum zoom position allows better coverage of all areas, including corners and edges within the lens view. Let's return to the Unreal Editor and select the checkerboard we created earlier. Duplicate the checkerboard and change its material to blue. We will use this blue checkerboard for the smaller size checkerboard in a later step. I'm going to delete the atmospheric fog, player start, and the sky sphere since they are not required during the calibration process. Next, temporarily add a cube to your scene. Select its material and search for checker. Then choose the checker material. Click on Browse to the Materials and Content browser, and this will direct you to the location where the material is saved. Double-click on the material to open the Material Graph Editor. Then, select all the nodes and copy them. While the cube is still selected, choose its material once again and search for Cross. Select M Crosshair from the available options. Next, navigate to the location where the material is saved. You will notice that M Crosshair is actually located inside the camera calibration content, and this material can be enabled during lens calibration. If you are feeling confused about what I am doing at the moment, don't worry, it will become clearer in the later steps. Now double-click on the material and paste the nodes we copied earlier from the checker material. Next, right-click with your mouse and search for Overlay. Choose Overlay from the available options. Connect the output, which is the first node from the right that we pasted earlier, to the input labeled A of the overlay. Then, connect the output of the overlay to the emissive color. This will break the original connection where it was previously attached. Select and connect the output of the multiply to the input labeled B of the overlay. Now, right-click on the alpha input of the overlay and choose Promote to Parameter from the available options. Change the parameter name to Checker Alpha and set the default value to 0.2. Next, select the Density node and change its parameter name to Checker Density and set the default value to 4. Lastly, apply the changes to the material and save it. The material editor will likely prompt you with a warning message. Proceed with Yes to apply the changes of the modified material to the original material. Select the cube we added earlier and delete it, as we no longer need it. Now, open the lens file we have been working on and switch to the calibration steps. In the viewport settings, select Overlay and change the setting from None to Crosshair. This newly added checker overlay can serve as a useful viewport guideline and enhance the workflow for the calibration process. Before we begin, it is crucial to determine the focus distance and which size printed checkerboard that will work for both the minimum and maximum zoom positions. Ensuring that the printed checkerboard remains in focus throughout the entire zoom range is essential. Using a higher aperture can help widen the range of focus. Maintaining consistent focus input is a critical aspect of successful lens calibration, as it directly impacts the accuracy of the distortion and focal length calibration. Taking the time to verify the focus input beforehand will prevent potential calibration errors and result in more reliable outcomes during the calibration process. As you can see, my focus input is 0.777 and the zoom input is currently at its minimum position. Let's proceed to create two key points, one at the minimum zoom position and another at the maximum zoom position, both with the same focus input. This will form a mapping curve with two key points, and the cine camera in the scene is controlled by the lens file. However, let's delete this mapping curve to explore another scenario. Now let's observe what happens when we use different focus input for the key points. For the first key point, I am going to use the same focus input we used earlier and set the zoom at its minimum position. For the second key point, I will use a different focus input and set the zoom at its maximum position. As a result, a new focus set has been added. The first key point, associated with the minimum zoom position, is stored under focus set 0.777, while the second key point, associated with the maximum zoom position, is stored under focus set 0.787. However, no mapping curve is formed for each focus set, and the cine camera remains unaffected and not being controlled either. When calibrating a zoom lens from its minimum to maximum position, maintaining the same focus input is critical for establishing a proper mapping curve. Now, switch to the calibration steps mode and then select lens distortion. I am using an A3 size checkerboard for the minimum zoom position with a raw focus input at 0.777, which corresponds to a focus distance of 400 centimeters. Next, navigate to the viewport settings and click on Lens Distortion Algo. From the available options, choose Lens Distortion Checkerboard. Select the camera calibration checkerboard that you created earlier. This checkerboard should represent the A3-sized printed checkerboard with a square size of 5.1 centimeters. Enable the Show Coverage Overlay option and choose Crosshair for overlay. Utilize the checker overlay as a guide to achieve good coverage of all areas, including corners and edges within the view of your lens. Let's start from the top right corner. Proceed to click on the viewport to capture images. Capture an appropriate total of images, around 16 or more. Ensure that these images are taken with the board at different angles, aligned directly to the camera, both at a 45-degree angle and in the opposite direction. Once you have captured all the required images, proceed with click on Add to Lens Distortion Calibration. This will calculate the focal length, distortion, and image center of the current zoom position. Subsequently, a RMS reprojection error report will be prompted as a result of the calculation. Generally, an error value below 1 is considered acceptable. Alright, let's take a look at the evaluated value obtained from the calculation for the minimum zoom position. It is 19.236 millimeters. It appears to be quite close. My focal length is around 18.5 millimeters. Next, we will calibrate it at its maximum zoom position, ensuring that it maintains the same focus input we used earlier. As you can see, the A3 size checkerboard appears too large or too close up. However, using the A4 size checkerboard seems to work well for my maximum zoom position. In the viewport settings, configure the checkerboard with the camera calibration checkerboard 2. Navigate to the Unreal Editor and select the duplicated CG checkerboard. Adjust its square size accordingly. For my case, I measured the square size on my A4 size checkerboard, which turned out to be 3.1 centimeters. Return to the calibration steps. I will use a checker overlay of 3x3. Feel free to adjust the checker overlay based on the size of your checkerboard and your personal preferences. Repeat the same process that we performed earlier. Click on the viewport to capture images and ensure that these images are taken with the board at different angles. Align directly to the camera, both at a 45-degree angle and in the opposite direction. Once you have captured all the required images, proceed with click on Add to Lens Distortion Calibration. Navigate to the Lens File panel and check if any key points have been added after the calibration. As you can see, a key point has been added at the maximum zoom position, resulting in the formation of a mapping curve. The evaluated value for the maximum zoom position is 109.716 millimeters, which is quite close. My focal length is now 110 millimeters. Next, we will proceed with another calibration at the midpoint of the mapping curve. Set your zoom input to around 0.5. Switch to the calibration steps. In this case, I will use an A3-sized checkerboard. Remember to set the CG checkerboard that represents the A3 size. Repeat the same process as we did for the minimum and maximum zoom positions. Once you have captured all the required images, proceed by clicking on Add to Lens Distortion Calibration. Navigate back to the Lens File panel, and you will see that we now have 3 key points for zoom, all using the same raw focus input: 0 for the minimum, 0.5 for half, and 1 for the maximum. Return to the calibration steps. Navigate to the Nodal Offset tab. Set the Nodal Offset algorithm to Nodal Offset Checkerboard. Configure the calibrator by selecting Camera Calibrator Checkerboard 1. Click on the viewport, resulting in the addition of a series of 2D and 3D points to a list. Proceed by choosing Apply to Calibrator. This action will reposition the CG checkerboard in the scene, aligning it with the checkerboard visible through your lens. As you can see, the CG checkerboard and the media plate are quite well aligned and matched. We are about to start the Nodal Offset calibration. Therefore, please proceed by closing and restarting the Bliss main application. Return to the Unreal Editor and select the Cine Camera Actor to verify its location and rotation values. When initializing the Bliss sensor from a clean start, the location values X, Y, Z should ideally be centered around 0 with minimal deviation. Regarding the rotation, the initial values for X and Y, which correspond to roll and tilt, may vary based on the mounting orientation of the sensor. However, the value for Z, which represents yaw, should be around 0 with a slight variation. Now select the April tag and verify that the tracking data for the April tag is being received and its location and rotation values are being updated. As you can see, the April tag in the scene is dynamically changing its position as I physically move the printed April tag. Here are some tricks to enhance the chances of obtaining successful results with the nodal offset. The Bliss sensor is an optical tracking system. Tracking becomes more reliable when the surrounding area is filled with reference points. During the nodal offset process, it's not obligatory to conduct it right in front of your green screen. Experimenting with a location that rich in details can lead to better outcomes. Next, open the lens file and ensure that the nodal point offset is empty and cleared of any values. Switch to the calibration steps and navigate to the Nodal Offset tab. Within the viewport settings, choose the Nodal Offsets Points method for the Nodal Offsets algorithm. Select REtracker as the calibrator. Position your camera's framing so that the printed REtracker falls within the view of your lens. I will be using the same raw focus input that we have been using, along with the minimum zoom position. The sequence for clicking calibration points on the REtracker may vary depending on the version of Unreal Engine you are using. In this demo video, we are using Unreal Engine version 5.2, which follows this order, starting from the top left, bottom right, top right, and finally the center. Reduce the lens file window slightly and position it side by side with the Live Link and Details panels, while keeping the REtracker selected. Keep an eye on the Live Link panel, ensuring that the tracking data for the REtracker consistently displays a green status. At the same time, monitor the Details panel to confirm that its location and rotation values being updated throughout the nodal offset process. Click on the viewport within the lens file window to capture the REtracker's 2D and 3D points for the nodal offset calculation. Proceed by clicking points in the following sequence: top left, bottom right, top right, and finally the center. Repeat the same process while positioning the REtracker at different angles and distances from the Bliss sensor. Your goal is to gather around 5 or more images. However, please be aware that increasing the number of images might result in a higher RMS reprojection error. Once you have done with all the required points, proceed with click on Add to Nodal Offset Calibration. Usually the expected outcome for the RMS reprojection error should ideally be 0. Now, switch to the lens file panel and verify the values of the nodal offset calculation. The third value of the location, as it should precisely represent the offset between your Bliss sensor and the center of your lens along the vertical axis. You can further validate this value by comparing it with the measurement obtained from the measuring tape. Regarding the first value of the location, it should indicate the offset between your Bliss sensor and the nodal point of your lens along the forward or backward direction. Therefore, the value should logically not exceed the total length of your camera. If the nodal offset result doesn't meet your expectations, you have the option to delete it. Subsequently, you can follow the same procedure once again to obtain a different calculation result. We will now align the virtual set with the physical environment using an Aruco marker. Please place the printed Aruco marker on the floor. Switch to the calibration steps and navigate to the Nodal Offset tab. Under the viewport settings, select the Nodal Offsets Aruco markers for the Nodal Offsets algorithm. Choose Aruco ID 8 as the calibrator. Adjust your camera's framing so that the printed Aruco tag is within the view of your lens. Before proceeding, select the Aruco marker from the outliner and reset its location and rotation values to 0. Then, select the floor and set the Z value to around -0.02. This adjustment will improve visualization while fine-tuning the delay in the later step. Return to the lens file panel and click on the viewport within the lens file window. This action will generate a series of 2D and 3D points in a list. Proceed by clicking Apply to Camera Parent. Adjust the transparency until achieving a good blend between the CG Aruco marker and the media plate. Pan your camera to either the left or right, and then come to a stop. Verify the alignment and matching between the CG Aruco marker and the marker on the floor. This step will allow you to evaluate the accuracy of the nodal offset results you have obtained earlier. While rapidly panning your camera from left to right, observe and measure the amount of delay. Navigate to the time data monitor and make adjustments to the time correction for Bliss. This adjustment will introduce amount of delay in the incoming tracking data from the Bliss sensor. The timing between the video feed and the tracking data appears to be well synchronized now. Next, I will enhance the focal length mapping by introducing additional key points. The current key points for the focal length mapping were obtained through the Distortion Calibration method. However, I will manually introduce more key points to the mapping curve using a checkerboard as a guide. While achieving this through the distortion calibration method is possible, however, utilizing the distortion calibration method would indeed lead to an increased time requirement for the calibration process. Switch to the calibration steps and navigate to the Nodal Offset tab. In the viewport settings, opt for the Nodal Offsets checkerboard as the Nodal Offsets algorithm, and select Camera Checkerboard 1 as the calibrator. Next, proceed by clicking within the viewport, and then select Apply to Calibrator. Adjust the transparency until achieving a good blend between the CG checkerboard and the media plate. As you can see, when zooming into the maximum and zooming out to the minimum position, the alignment and matching are noticeably off. I will now share a trick to fix this issue. Undock the Calibration Steps panel and position it side by side to the Lens File panel. Then I will proceed to simply remove the image center values that were obtained from the earlier distortion calibration process. Before making any modifications to the current lens file, please create a backup copy of it, in case you need to revert in the future. To clear the image center values, select the image center within the lens file panel and then click on the trash bin icon. This action will reset and utilize the default values of 0.5 for both the X and Y coordinates of the image center across the entire zoom range. Although this approach might not be the conventional method, it has proven effective in my case. Each time we make adjustments to the lens file, it is necessary to update the position of the CG checkerboard. To do this, return to the halfway point of the mapping curve. Click on the viewport within the calibration steps, and then proceed to select Apply to Calibrator. As you can observe, the alignment and matching significantly improve with the default values of the image center. To fine-tune the focal length, drag its key point up and down until the CG checkerboard is precisely aligned and matches the checkerboard in your media plate. During the process of enhancing and refining your focal length mapping curve, employing linear interpolation simplifies the procedure. Please feel free to add key points along the mapping curve, using the same raw focus input. In my case, the focus raw input should always be 0.777. Drag the key points up and down until the CG checkerboard and your printed checkerboard are well aligned and matched. Continue to introduce additional key points to further refine the mapping curve. This approach will result in a more accurate representation of the entire zoom focal length. It appears that introducing a slight delay in the lens data could achieving better synchronization. To implement this, navigate to the Time Data Monitor and proceed to make adjustments to the time correction for free D, which serves as the live link for receiving the lens data. The timing between the video feed and the lens data now appears to be synchronized. Next, continue by fine-tuning the alignment and matching between the checkerboards, covering the range from the minimum to the maximum zoom position. However, in this phase, make sure to frame your checkerboard near both the left and right edges, as well as the center. Also, remember to test the focus distance during this process. Alright, that concludes part 3 of this demo video. To wrap things up, let's enjoy the quick demo we've put together using the lens file we have created from the lens calibration process. Thank you for watching.